Hello and welcome to this edition of EyeFi in Conversation With, our new series of virtual discussions about our favourite subject, what else? The movies. My name is Dave O'Mahony, I'm Head of Cinema Programming at the Irish Film Institute, and I'm delighted that today my guest is director Neasa Hardiman, who I'm delighted to say most recent film, Sea Fever, may be coming back to a cinema near you. Neasa, is that correct?
Fingers crossed. We're hoping. It was due to go on release across the US on the 10th of April and across Europe on the 24th of April. So our timing was pretty extraordinary. I mean, it was extraordinary in that the film deals with issues of quarantine, but really extraordinary in that we couldn't actually release it. So that was disappointing. I hope some people managed to get to see it on the various pay-per-view platforms, and I believe that it's had a good response in terms of the numbers of people who managed to see it. But it would be wonderful if we could show it in the cinema.
The film is going to be like a test, like a case study in future, in terms of distribution from, huge launch, ready to go, disappears for a couple of months, comes back, it's quite an extraordinary life cycle so far this film has had. And it doesn't feel like it's over. Like it feels like it's, I think there's a huge amount of interest for people to come back and support a lot of the films that got caught in the crossfire of the lockdown. So,
yeah, I mean, I have to say it was wonderful, and we got a lot of really lovely feedback and great reviews from the film when it had to go on a digital release rather than a theatrical release. But as you say, nothing beats the theatrical experience. It's just not the same. So the opportunity to share it with people cinematically would be fantastic. Now, tell me if this is true. I've heard that because, of course, we're going to reduce the number of people who can come into cinemas, right? Because we have to keep the 1.5 meter, 2 meter distance. And there was some talk of actually that might bring us to an older way in which we release movies, where we release them for a longer period and there's more kind of buy-in from the audience rather than this kind of shock and awe of the opening weekend and then it's gone. And I think if this is an outcome of COVID, I think that might be kind of great for independent cinema.
I'm determinedly optimistic about this whole situation. I think there's a lot of positive things will shake loose from it. We're all learning new ways, and that's never a bad thing to stop, reboot and start again. It's because you get so caught into a cycle of doing things. So
well, that's the thing.
This will be more of an old-fashioned rollout. People may discover the film in a different way, but as you say, I just can't wait to see it and other films in the cinema again.
No, just this one.
Yeah, I know. So, our doors have been closed now since March 12th.
Wow.
So that's quite a long time. Now, so tell me, in this period, what have your viewing habits been? Have you been, taking the time to discover classics you never got around to watching, or are you revisiting old favorites?
I have to say it's been kind of a bit of both.
Okay.
I've really enjoyed. I have 2 teenage children, so I've really enjoyed kind of sharing a lot of classic cinema with them.
Gotcha.
And I've been revisiting a lot of my favorite cinema, as well as catching up on films that went like Sea Fever into digital release.
Yeah.
So it's been a great pleasure actually to have the time and the facility to really do a deep dive into the kinds of films that you love and to explore what's out there.
And has anything stood out for you?
Gosh, of recent releases.
Sure.
I watched, it's not a recent release actually, but I watched a film last night called Son of Soul, which was a Hungarian-German film about the Holocaust. Yeah. And I thought that was an extraordinary piece of work. I haven't seen anything as compelling and distressing, but very honest and truthful in a long time. I really loved it. In a very different mood. I really enjoyed Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Celine Sciamma's excellent film. Yeah, she is a brilliant filmmaker, and this is her masterwork to date. I'm sure she will go on and do even more excellent films, but it's an extraordinary movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Son of Saul is an interesting one to mention. Actually, it's a film that could work quite well on the small screen. Like it's so because the way it's Laszlo Nemes, he films it. He just adheres very close to the face of the protagonist for.
It's an extraordinary piece of work. Yes, and again, yeah. This you know, the cinematography is there to amplify meaning, and the way that he sets up those extremely long and very technically adroit traveling shots, where the depth of field is always incredibly shallow and you're with that central figure all the time. And yet he creates these beautiful, really elegantly constructed frames. You know, there isn't a moment of that film that isn't very carefully considered and very thought out and very saturated with emotion. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary film.
I find the sound design is incredible, because you're almost, it's almost as though you're in the character's head. You know, you're experiencing as he's so
beautiful performance as well. Yeah,
off screen, you know, but you're hearing them. You don't see them sometimes.
That's very true. I think you're absolutely right. The sound design is extraordinary, and that absolute commitment to subjectivity, because the story is so horrific. Of course, he's very careful always not to turn it into something that feels exploitative or that feels voyeuristic. And I think that decision, you know, to stay very tight and to have a traveling camera and you know, a short selection of very long takes, keeps you breathlessly within that subjective position of that man. And as you say, then the soundscapes kind of build around him, and his dissociation is really incredibly well articulated then through that soundscape. It's a beautiful piece of work. Speaking of articulating, you know, the truth about inhuman situations, one film that I had missed and that I was really delighted to get a chance to see was Missing, the Costa Gavras film from the 80s.
Yes.
Which again, you know, the way that he uses the camera to tell us the truth about a horrific set of events without ever diminishing the people who have suffered, and without ever making a spectacle of the suffering, I thought was an extraordinary achievement. And again, the mobilization of emotion in that film, I thought was really terrific.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We showed a Costa Gavras film. I'm going to say last year that my temporal abilities have gone out the window. One of his most famous films, Z.
Oh yeah.
Great thing about his, like, they're very, you know, deeply politicized thrillers. So there's a lot going on, but he makes incredibly compelling stories that will hook a viewer, will hook an audience into the emotional aspect of what's happening, what's playing out for the characters.
You're absolutely right, and I think that is the thing that I think is terrific about both those films, and actually some of the films that I've been kind of showing my kids that I've loved.
Yeah.
I realized this is the thread that I was following, because I showed them Alan Pakula, all of his films basically, all of which are amazing.
Stunning.
But in particular, Clute, which is an absolutely brilliant forensic exploration of structural power asymmetries. And again, very like those other films, this is extraordinary marriage of form and meaning, where everything from the placement of the camera to the costume amplifies this thing that's quite difficult to articulate even now, so many years later. You know, this kind of Jane Fonda's experience of being looked at and evaluated and observed, and what that's like for a young woman in this kind of cultural matrix of power and looking. I think it's an exceptional piece of work. It's absolutely brilliant.
We showed the Parallax View.
That's a terrific film.
On a pretty knackered 35mm print, I have to say. But I think, you know, that's one of the great things about the EyeFi, that we can show films on film, on 16, on 70, and our audiences are quite forgiving when, you know, sometimes they're a little bit rough around the edges. It's romantic. This film has played in projection booths across the world. You know,
100%, 100%. And I actually think the quality of the work is not determined by the pristine nature of the print. That's not what you know, if you're looking at how pristine the print is, the director has lost you already.
Yeah, well,
you know, 70mm print. One film I was a bit trepidatious about showing my children, but we went ahead and did it, was Lawrence of Arabia. On TV. But I'll tell you what,
that film will grip you.
I was amazed at how well it worked.
Yeah.
I know it's not the same. It's not the same as that immersive experience. And yet, apropos of what you were just saying about the quality of the print and all of those things, actually, because formally, structurally, emotionally, it's so powerful that you turn out the lights, you put it on your screen, and it just draws you in. It draws you in. And I was kind of astounded at how well it works. Because you know the way sometimes if a film is so deliberately, not unlike Sea Fever, actually, not that I'm comparing it to Lawrence of Arabia, but so deliberately working with scale.
Sure.
That it's a film that leans into the scale of the cinematic image. That sometimes actually it can feel a bit off on TV, or you don't quite get it. But I thought it was obviously not the same experience, and I'd far rather have shown it to them on a massive screen. But it's a testament to the quality of the filmmaking that it still draws you in, and it was still mesmeric, and they still really responded to it, and we're talking about it for days afterwards. That
amazing. Yeah.
That incredible emotional punch was still really powerfully there.
I first saw Lawrence of Arabia on the telly, quite young.
Sure, a lot of people did. Yeah.
Sure, and what drew me in was his story. It was, of course, the scale is there, and obviously that's so much part of it. But it was his story. It was his emotional journey. That's what hooked me.
It's really powerful, right? That story of identity and belonging, and
absolutely.
Where do I belong and who am I? Like, that's incredibly powerful in that film, and so well told.
And we're talking about these future formative experiences for your two. Can you tell us? Do you have any? What your earliest movie memory, or perhaps a formative movie memory?
Well, I suspect, like a lot of people of my generation, a lot of the first movies that I have memories of were through their being rebroadcast on TV. And I remember when we got British terrestrial channels for the first time, BBC Two would do these seasons of themed films, and they did a season of classic noir. And I have really powerful memories of waiting until I think it was like a Saturday night.
Yeah.
When the next classic noir would come on BBC Two, and being introduced to Howard Hawks and The Big Sleep and those kinds of movies, and just being so alive to exactly what we were just talking about, actually, that unity of form and emotional truth, that the performances are amazing, and the style of that cinema was just so extraordinarily deliberate.
Yes.
And that kind of got me into Fritz Lang and got me into early German cinema and looking at the roots of that. And I feel like that was probably quite a formative experience.
I wonder, you mentioned BBC Two. It's actually come up in these conversations. You'll see online that Alex Cox and Movie Drone, the introductions. Do you remember those? They were like a game for me, definitely.
Yeah, I do remember those. I do. I was always a really avid reader, and I was always very interested in storytelling in all its forms. And I have to say, this is probably a terrible admission, I didn't really love the idea of somebody mediating that experience for me.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I didn't feel like Alex Cox shared the same insights that I did. I didn't feel like he came from the same cultural or emotional place that I did. Yeah. And I didn't really want that experience from him. I did, like, much and all, as he's a brilliant filmmaker, and it could have been anybody. But it's like reading the introduction to a novel. You read it afterwards. You don't read it beforehand. You want the unmediated experience. You want to live it and feel it. And then afterwards know, well, how did my visceral experience compare to somebody else's visceral experience? But I think having that mediated felt a little bit too corralling for me.
Well, I think it's a very interesting point, because this is something that we talk about quite a lot at the EyeFi, that sometimes you're setting up expectations for an audience if you start telling them things about the film to watch out for, that it's not a very pure experience for them. As you say, it's a mediated
experience. It turns it into a different experience, I think.
So.
And I suspect this is just purely personal, but I think the subtext of that sometimes can be, this is a bit difficult, so we're going to help you. And nothing could be more off-putting. Or, I understand this film better than you ever could, so I'm going to tell you what's interesting about it before you see it, which is also quite off-putting. So I feel like, as a filmmaker, you want to do that thing of, but actually, just as a viewer, you want to do that thing of closing your eyes and lying back into the experience.
Yeah.
You know, film is, it's such an extraordinary medium. You know, it's imagery, it's human life, it's the voice, it's performance, it's rhythm, it's music. It's a lot of the emotional experiences that are tied into the intellectual experience of film are almost inarticulable in the moment of receiving them. And I think you shouldn't try to corral that, actually.
I think that's very fascinating. That's really, really interesting. I'll certainly take some notes. And tell me, what films have meant the most to you over the years? Like, are there films that you go back to again and again?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like actually Lawrence of Arabian Flute and Cabaret are films that I think about a lot. And I suspect that's because they're all to do with identity and shifting identity and forming yourself. I'm also drawn to films that are about the outsider and that struggle to connect and Cassandra figures.
Right.
So I watched everything that Celine Sciamma has done because I feel like that's absolutely her world and her perspective. I love Catherine Bigelow for the same reason. And for that reason that she's, you know, there is no better formalist alive today than Catherine Bigelow. She's the most incredible master of form. And what she does with that is so interesting. You know, her muscle is so powerful as a filmmaker. And her interrogations of masculinity are just so extraordinary and powerful. You know, things like The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30.
Yeah.
And her earlier films as well. You know, her take on vampires is just
dark,
so powerful, interesting and exciting.
Yeah.
And who else do I never miss? Denis Villeneuve. I feel like there is a man who is a master of tone. The tone in his films, that
Beautiful
sense of unease, that is always just simmering below the surface. It's never, you know, it's never splashy. It's never about spectacle. It's always about mood. It's about performance and this incredible Unheimlichkeit that he manages. Sidney Lumet, again, there's a little bit what you were saying earlier, that idea of you take a film that's a thriller and you set that tension so that it's resonating with the audience and they're leaning forward going, then what?
Yeah.
And you use that form to really tenderly and accurately explore character, and he is such a master of that, of creating films that are intellectually rigorous and interesting and exciting, and films about ideas that hit you here and never relax their tension. I think that's an extraordinary ability. Howard Hawks, of course, rhythm, mastery of the unexpected turn. Nobody could direct a dialogue scene like Howard Hawks. I mean, Sergeant Sixty, obviously His Girl Friday, which is just a meisterwerk. I don't think it's ever been bettered. Michael Ritchie, who doesn't get much press these days, but he made a series of amazing films that I think everybody should see. I think they're such emotionally precise, brilliantly pitched, subjective, experiential films. And again, you know, particularly The Candidate or Downhill Race or Smile, that are such forensic examinations of a whole kind of matrix of power asymmetries and how that works, but told with real emotional sincerity and truth. I think they're kind of amazing films.
These conversations are great. I'm getting so many ideas for seasons now.
Brilliant, new Michael Ritchie season, absolutely.
Absolutely. And also, you just hit a sore spot. We had Cabaret scheduled to do something with it this summer, but
oh wow,
we may do it next year instead. So watch this bit. We were going to do a Bob Fosse whole retrospective, but
after
there you go.
Virgin.
We'll kick it into next year. Do
you know what? It's such an extraordinary film. It's another film that I kind of dusted off and put into the DVD player for my kids. And I was really struck again, A, how much it's influenced my work, and B, the fact that I knew every single second of that film and I knew every frame of it that I'd kind of forgotten I knew, you know, that way. And what an incredible, unified, elegant, deceptively simple work it is. It's, you know, the moving in and out of the music, and, you know, I'm doubt I will ever make a musical, but the way that he incorporates the music into the emotional journey of those characters, the way that the music is used both to warn you about the rise of fascism and to make you feel the pleasures of the rise of fascism in this very intelligent and nuanced way. And the use of mirrors and the use of this idea of self-invention through mirror and distortion, and of course this simmering subtextual clash that's happening politically in the background that these characters are too wrapped up in themselves to understand. It's an incredible piece of work. It's so
rich,
beautiful.
so layered. Yeah. And is there a figure that you have admired, or that you really admire, that you feel has been overlooked or is not as well known as they could be? A writer, actor?
Well, I think we should definitely go for Michael Ritchie here, shouldn't we? I think
that answers that question. I firmly believe that there's a Michael Ritchie focus on the cards. And I have someone to do my introductions for me as well. And bringing it back to the EyeFi, as I'm firmly looking forward to throwing open our doors again in a couple of weeks, whatever that will be. Do you have any particularly memorable stories you can regale us with about the EyeFi? Any Q&As you were at, or perhaps you were on, or a panel that went well or not so well?
Do you know, I absolutely love the EyeFi. I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to you, but there's something about the venue, isn't there? There's something about the physical space that it has a sense of occasion to it. It's the light in that atrium. It's that open space where you're meeting people who are buying tickets and coming and going, but there's enough room for you to stop. And because it's Dublin, you know, you're always going to meet somebody that you know, and they're always going to have a story for you because they're either going into something or coming out of something.
Yeah.
And the range of cinema that's shown there, there's always going to be an adventure when you go in. So I love that. And I've been lucky enough to be kindly invited to sit on a couple of different panels there, and it's always a pleasure. And I always come out with my spirits lifted that there's a whole community that cares about culture and that cares about what we do with our culture and how we communicate it, and that there is a real sense of cinema being alive and being discursive and transformative within the EyeFi, and a whole community of people that can meet and share that experience. And that's thrilling, I think. It's an invaluable jewel in the heart of the city.
That engagement goes absolutely to the core of everything that we do. You know, it is a dialogue with audience. You know, what your program is an open dialogue with your audience. You know, it's curation, sure, but it's not sealed off. You know, we want to share and discuss it.
I think you really feel that, and I think audiences, including me, really feel that this is our place. This is our place where we can go and nose around the bookshop and, you know, have a look at what new DVDs are in and talk to people who are coming in and out and see what's coming, and just that sense that we own
it. And that really is very, very important to me. Before I leave you go, I'm going to ask what is fast becoming my traditional final question. What's your favorite Irish film or films?
I thought you might ask me this. Now I have a really annoying answer for this.
Let's
because, as you may know, I have a doctorate in film theory. So one of the first things you learn when you're an academic is, what exactly do you mean by that question? So, and it is a tricky question. Like, what's an Irish film? Is Barry Lyndon an Irish film? It's a great film. Is it an Irish film? Kubrick? Yeah. I don't know. Was shot in Ireland? Is it a film that has Irish money in it? Only Irish money? Because then we're talking about, you know, quite a small country film. Is it a film that has an Irish director? But then, you know, are you going to say Behind Enemy Lines is an Irish film? Or is it a film? So it's a tricky question. But that aside, I'm just going to tell you my favorite Irish film.
Go for it.
Love Barry Lyndon. I think Barry Lyndon is an incredible film, Irish or not. I think the Dead is an amazing Irish film. I mean, this, you know, everybody is going to name these films, of course, because they are extraordinary. And the thing that I love about The Dead is that it feels so familiar. It feels so familiar. I think it's that inner city Dublin family. That's like, it really reminds me of my aunts. It really reminds me of my uncle. My folks were really friendly with Frank Patterson. Like, it just felt like, oh God, I really know this, in a way that felt really visceral and emotive. That was wonderful and incredible achievement. I absolutely loved Emil Reynolds' documentary, The Farthest. Now, is that an Irish film? I don't know, but it's an incredible documentary.
Universal.
And it's, oh, yeah. Galactic.
Indeed, galactic.
And again, I think, you know, that merging of complex intellectual ideas with something that was really emotive and exciting and thrilling. And I think she delivered that in spades. And I think Kate McCullough shot it beautifully as well. It's an incredible piece of work. The Butcher Boy, I think, is an amazing Irish film, using the full artillery of cinema as only Neil Jordan can. Yeah. And he remains an unusual filmmaker in Ireland, I think, in that he is somebody who uses the full artillery of cinema. You know, he's obviously rooted in that kind of 1970s, 80s imagistic, magical realism tradition. And he really pushed Irish cinema in that direction, when there isn't really a major tradition of that here. You know, it tends to be very realist, very like verite almost, is something that we go for a lot. I think we borrow from that English tradition of we're going to tell authentic working class stories with authentic working class cinema, or cinema forms that should feel like the camera is an unmediated recording device. And you know, and I love that cinema, don't get me wrong, I think it's amazing, and you know, it's rooted in the work of people like Ken Loach.
Sure.
And they're powerful and emotive and punchy and important. But it's not the only kind of cinema. And maybe it's to do with, I don't know, maybe this is a bit of a cliche to say that we have such a rich linguistic tradition. We have such a rich tradition of writing and poetry and music, that sort of visual spatial experimentation that cinema kind of invites isn't something that has been massively explored in Ireland over the past 50 years. But I feel like we're you know, I think Neil Jordan really did beat a path there, and I think we see a lot more filmmakers doing that now, including me. You know, I feel like he was a massive influence on me in that respect, going, doesn't have to be like Jean Renoir, it can be like Fritz Lang, you know, we can tell those stories too. And
you won't have very much longer to wait before we show The Dead on 35mm again, as we do every year at the Feast of the Epiphany. So yeah, that's become one of our regular, most popular dates in the calendar. That we have a wonderful crowd for it.
It's a tradition.
It is a tradition. Neasa, thank you so much for joining me today, and it's been a pleasure, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Well, thank you so much for asking me. It was a great honor to speak with you.
Thank you so much.